Hello, everyone. This is another episode of On.NET, a weekly show about .NET with the .NET team and guests. And today our guest is Pratap. Hi, Pratap. How are you?
Hi, Bertrand. I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good, thank you. So today we're going to talk about MS Test, and in particular MS Test with .NET Core, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself and about what you're working on.
Okay, so my name is Pratap Lakshman, as I just introduced, and I work on the Visual Studio Test platform. So if you've ever run tests within Visual Studio using Test Explorer or from the command line using vstestconsole.exe, or if you've used any of our allied tooling like fakes or code coverage or IntelliTest, those are the components that our team owns. So I am the program manager on that Visual Studio Test platform team. And one of the assets that we currently own is the MS Test framework. So this is a test framework that can be used to author different kinds of tests. And so that's kind of the topic of, I guess, today's session.
So MS Test has long been our default recommendation for people to write tests using .NET, right? So, but um, how does it compare with other .NET testing frameworks such as XUnit or NUnit or other similar things?
Right. So as a test platform, we've been very intentional about taking a pluralistic approach. So in our test platform, you could pretty much write tests using MS Test or XUnit or NUnit or what have you, right? If you're writing JavaScript, you could use Mocha, Jasmine, whatever you want to bring in terms of writing tests. As a test platform, we take a somewhat of an equal approach to all of these. So we don't try to take sides, in terms of one framework over the other. We take a very platform centric view. So if you were to bring in your own test framework, you could write an adapter for that and plug in to the testing engine and the testing platform. So from that perspective, I'm not sure how essential it is to understand the differences between MS Test or NUnit or XUnit and so on. But the important point is that these can all coexist, right? And
That makes
for
total
example,
sense.
yes, so much like .NET, right? So .NET is like this, any language can target .NET, right? Whether it's a C# or VB or whatever, what have you, right? We take a very similar approach. VS, in fact, takes a similar approach, right? So any language can become a first-class citizen within VS. So if they provide a language service, then IntelliSense kicks in, and you can debug and stuff like that, right? So across our stack, we take a very pluralistic kind of approach, and the test platform is no different. So we treat all of these kind of as equally as possible. And specifically in the context of MS Test, right, as a test platform, when we have seen that there are so many of these frameworks and adapters that have come up, excellent ones at that, like XUnit, NUnit, there's for JavaScript, there's HutSpa, and so on, right? So MS Test occupies a kind of distinguished position in this ecosystem of frameworks and adapters. So it kind of predates many of these other frameworks, and there are lots of customers who are still using MS Test, and they have these huge corpuses of tests. And so, what do we do for such users? How do we help them come forward? How do we help them move to .NET Core? Right. So it is as much about making our customers successful in moving to this newer .NET Core world, as it is about even helping .NET Core itself succeed. So as a platform for .NET Core to succeed, you need more and more developers coming to it. They should have more and more choice in terms of what tools they can use, what test frameworks they can use, and so on. So this MS Test effort that we recently announced support for .NET Core 1.0 RC2 and ASP.NET Core 1.0 RC2. So this entire effort is in that context of how do we make sure that our customers are, there's a path forward for them, and how do we make sure that the platforms also succeed. So there's a lot of synergy there.
Okay, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what I'm hearing here is that a large part of what you're doing is actually enabling those other possible testing frameworks, including with the test runner in Visual Studio.
Yes. So, for example, there have been a lot of our customers have existing tests in MS Test, written with MS Test. How do they move to ASP.NET Core 1.0? Do they have to learn something completely new? Can they leverage their existing assets and knowledge? Right. So when we enable support for MS Test on these new platforms, it enables our customers to very seamlessly move to these new platforms as well. Right. So that is the kind of point about that I was trying to make here.
What about the command line, which is a first-class citizen in the .NET Core experience?
Yeah, in fact, I'll show you a demo of how the command line integrates. So in the desktop world, right, we have there's a separate command line for running tests. It's the vstest.console.exe that can run tests in any of these frameworks as long as there's an available adapter there. In the .NET world, there is the .NET command, and then there are verbs like build, like compile, like test. So we are now integrated into that test verb in the .NET world. So you could simply say .NET space test, and then the tests in your solution will be discovered and executed and so on. So we are, like I said, right, we want to bring the capabilities of the platform itself to the .NET world.
.NET Core.
So, to the .NET Core world, yeah, that's right. So, in fact, we look at. Can I maybe spend a minute or two on what I mean by test platform itself?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Okay, so let me see. Let me see if I can share a slide for that. Okay, let me know if you are able to see this slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we talk about a test, right, it goes through a complete life cycle. So, like I was saying, our test platform can discover and execute tests in a variety of test frameworks, be it .NET, be it C++, be it JavaScript, and so on. And the way these plug into the test platform is through this adapter that they write. So there is an acquisition phase where sitting inside VS or as a V6 or as a NuGet package, you acquire the adapter. Now, once you acquire that adapter, let's say you already have a huge corpus of tests. You might want to run only a subset, and you might want to scope it based on certain attributes in the test itself, like based on its name, based on its some traits, or based on outcome, and so on, right? So there is a selection stage in the life cycle. Once you select a set of tests, you can configure the way in which they would run. For example, you can say, hey, what is the runtime to be used? Is it x86? Is it x64? What is the .NET runtime to use? Do you want any data collectors running in the background while the test is running? For example, you might be running a UI test, and then whenever the test fails, you might want to capture a screenshot. So that's the kind of data collection while the test is running. So you can configure all this using what we call as a run settings file. This is just an XML file. And there are adapter specific sections within that XML file. So There is a section for N unit, there's a section for X unit, and so on. Each adapter can define their own section. And then the tests actually get run as configured and using the appropriate adapter. And then there is the debug phase where you can debug a test, and that is very platform specific. The way you debug on desktop, the way you debug on a phone, the way you debug a UWP app, and so on. And then there is the analyze phase where the system parses the run and figures out the outcome, whether the test passed or failed, what was the duration, and so on and so forth. So there's this analysis phase. And then there is finally a reporting phase where the outcome is rendered into the test explorer in VS, or maybe to standard out, or maybe to a store in TFS, or maybe to a log file, and so on. So there is this whole life cycle that a test case goes through. And as a test platform, we allow plugins into each of these stages. So that's what I meant by a test platform. And one of the frameworks that plugs into these stages is MS Test. But you could as well imagine that any other framework might also plug in a very similar manner.
Oh. And there might be cases where you actually have several different testing frameworks that you have to run on your application. Maybe some tests for your front end, JavaScript tests, and .NET tests in the back end, right? How does that work?
Yes. So that a mix is possible. When you have a mix, then you would have multiple adapters installed.
Or functional test versus unit test, and how do you aggregate all that? And
right. So, for example, if you're running UI tests, and the UI tests are written using C#, using, let's say, MS Test, then you'd have appropriate adapters for that. If you're using JavaScript and you've written, let's say, tests using Jasmine or Mocha or something, you would have an appropriate adapter for that. In this case, there's an adapter called HutSpa. So you could install that. If you're using C++, there are adapters for that, right? So as a test platform, we allow at each of the stages that I said, you can plug in as an adapter, you can plug in as a data collector, you can plug in as a logger, and so on. So we do have situations where people run multiple kinds of tests when they have a multi-tiered app and so on. Right?
Great.
And this is especially true in the case of MS Test, because MS Test has been used to write unit tests, it has been used to write UI tests, it has been used to write load tests, and so on. So it's especially true in the case of MS Test. And so that kind of brings me back to the value of bringing MS Test to the .NET Core world. So there are all these customers and users of MS Test who are already having corpuses of tests. How do we help them move to .NET Core? Right?
Yeah, and it's doing a lot more than just unit testing.
Oh yes. It's a complete platform by itself. I can actually show you a demo here of how MS Test integrates into. Yeah, let me just share my screen here. Okay, so I'm in VS, and if you go to the .NET Core website, I think it's www.microsoft.com/net/core. You can get the Visual Studio official MSI installer for the .NET Core bits. So I have already installed that on this machine. So now if I go and create a new project, I can actually see this .NET Core node. Okay, so I'm just going to go and create just some.
Hold on just a few seconds, because actually nothing changed on your screen for some reason. Are we supposed to see the new project dialog right now?
Yes.
I can see it. maybe stop sharing and start again.
All right.
Okay.
Is it visible now?
No, is it on the same screen?
Yes, it is on the same screen.
Yeah, I can only see the start page on your Visual Studio right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the
That's
same.
strange.
It's the same on the live stream, which is really strange.
Okay, but this is just the new project dialog.
Okay, let's just carry on.
Yeah, so it's the new project dialog, and I'm just going to create a class library.
Oh, did you share the screen or did you share the window?
I shared the screen.
Oh, okay. That is really weird. Okay, let's just carry on. Hopefully.
All right. All right. So I'm just going to create an class library. I'll just call it my app 1. Okay. And so now what you see is that a .NET Core application has been created. And to this, I can now go and add references to the MS Test NuGet packages that we have published. So we have published the MS Test framework. And so I'm just adding that NuGet. And like I said, every framework comes with its own adapter. So in this case, because I'm on the .NET Core world, we need the .NET -test-ms test adapter. So I go ahead and install that.
And people who have experimented with XUnit, for example, also had to bring down the NuGet package for XUnit and also the .NET-test.xunit, which is the equivalent of that.
Exactly. So this is exactly the same as what people would have had to do if they were using something like XUnit. And now I'm just going to in the project.json file.
You're not sharing anymore. Yep.
Okay, so in the project.json file, I'm adding this property, test runner, and giving it the value MS test. Okay.
So this is how the command line, for example, will know how to discover the tests and how to run them.
Correct. So when it sees this test runner property, it'll look up the value. In this case, the value happens to be MS test, and then it'll construct the adapter to look for as .NET-test-ms test. So it'll prepend .NET-test to this string. Okay. So now that we have done this, right? Now we are all set. We can actually go and start authoring a test here. So let me start by adding a using directive using Microsoft dot Visual Studio dot test tools dot unit testing. Okay, and now I'm going to make this a test class. These are MS test attributes. So we can say something is a test class, and let's call this our test method. And I'm just going to write a passing test. assert is true.
That should pass.
And yeah, and maybe I'll write a failing test as well. Assert or true, false. Call this a failing test. Okay. Now, if I bring up the test explorer on the left side and let me build the solution, what happens is that exactly like how it would happen when you're in VS developing apps for desktop and so on, the tests are discovered. So if you see on the left side in the pane, there is a failing test and there's a passing test, right? And now right from inside here, you can run them as well. You can run them, you can, group them, you can sort them. All of the operations that you could otherwise do from within the test explorer, you can now do it from, you can continue to do that even for these kinds of tests. So there is first class integration of MS test based tests for apps targeting .NET Core 1.0 and of course ASP.NET Core 1.0. So this is how you do it from within the IDE. You could do exactly the same if you are doing it from the command line as well. So this is my app one, right? That was my solution name. Okay, so let me. Are you able to see my command line?
No.
Okay, so let me stop sharing. I think I need to give me a second. Yeah, let me share my command line. Okay, so if I go to D, this was my app, right? So if I go to the folder which has the project.json file, which is where I am right now, I can simply say .NET space test, and it will look up the project.json file, discover the tests, run them, report them, and so on. Exactly like what happened from within VS. So if you see here, you can now see that, hey, two tests were there, one of them passed, the other failed, and so on. Okay.
Nice.
So this is the kind of integration that we have done into for .NET Core. So you can run the tests exactly as you would in the case of big.NET for VS. Exactly in the same way you can do that from VS for apps targeting .NET Core and ASP.NET. You can do that from within VS and from the command line. And the same, let me go back to VS for a second. Let me just go back to VS. You could do exactly the same even for apps targeting the desktop. So the same MS Test framework package that we have released, right? You can do you can use that and now write tests targeting the desktop as well. So you can imagine that you don't have to, shuffle around with multiple frameworks and depending on what you're targeting. So one of the issues that we had with the MS test in the past was that we had this subtly different implementations for desktop and for UWP and store, and so that it was subtly different because as new app platforms were getting introduced, MS test tends to be the first test framework that enables support for those app platforms. So historically, that has been the case. So as we did that, we ended up, with subtly different implementations and so on. So this one that we have recently released is the converged implementation. So this is now going to provide uniform support for .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, desktop, UWP, and so on.
how does it work with multi-targeting? Because in a project.json, you can actually specify several runtimes that you're targeting. How would you run the tests on the different target frameworks
Right. So
that
even
are in
in
your
the
project.json?
correct. So in the project.json file, you can actually specify the target framework, right? So we will actually honor that, and there is a blog post that I'll point to later on. So that has a sample of how you can write the same app and then have it target multiple runtimes, target frameworks. So it should be
So
possible to run it
in the
against.
command line, you can, sorry, in the command line, you can specify a flag maybe saying on what runtime you're testing, or
So either
how
that
does it
or
work in practice?
so either that or we'll pick it up from the project.json file itself.
And you will run the tests on all of them, or?
We'll run it on all of them. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
And in Visual Studio?
So it would be very similar, right?
Mm-hmm. Is it something you can show, or?
I don't have that demo right now ready, but
Okay,
I'll
that's
point
fine.
you to the blog which has those
Oh,
details.
great! Yeah, that would be great. I can put it in the description, and people can check it out. Okay, thank you.
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
One question I had was about other test runners, in particular in the case of continuous integration.
Yes.
So how would you integrate with a CI server, for example?
So in the CI server, right, especially in VSTS, so we have these the notion of a test task. So in VSTS you create you have your source code in a repository, and then you set up a build definition, and in the build definition you describe where your source code lives so that they can be synced and made ready for build. You describe where your source code lives, what kind of build agents to use, where the build should happen, what are your dependencies, what NuGet packages to install before triggering the build, and so on. And in that, one of the steps that we specify, that you can specify, is a test step, which is basically what is known as a VS test task. Now, in that VS test task, you can actually call out the containers in which your tests are living. So it could be a DLL or any binary or any source file in the case of JavaScript in which your tests are living. Then you can specify various kinds of properties on how you want the tests to be run. Do you want it to run parallel, and so on and so forth, whether you want any data collectors enabled, and so on. And in that context, you can actually tell where your test adapters live, where to pick up the test adapters from. So for example, if your test adapters are v6 based, then you can have a switch which says enable v6 adapters or use v6 extensions and set that to true. If your adapters are NuGet based, then you can say that, hey, my adapters are NuGet based, in which case, as part of the execution of that build task, when it is time for the test step to execute, those NuGet based references are resolved. And so in the case of MS test, if your references are in NuGet, those references will get resolved, and then the test will get run. It's the same if you are using NUnit, for example. If your NUnit adapter is resolved via a NuGet reference, the same process will hold through. So in our CI, we don't distinguish between somebody having to between somebody running a MS test based test or a NUnit based test, or so on and so forth. Like I said, right, it's a test platform, so we don't really distinguish, or we don't make it any different in terms of a workflow for what kind of tests you're running. So CI integration for MS test is the same as CI integration for NUnit and for XUnit or for HubSpot or for that matter, right? So this is how we do CI. There's a test task, and within the test task, you specify all of the parameters that are required for the tests to be run successfully. And again, like I said, right, there's a configuration step where you can specify run settings, and which is just an XML file. You can have run settings and they can do data collection and so on, right? That entire capability is exposed through CI as well. So in fact, on channel 9, I think there's a video of how to do uh, testing in CI. I'll send a link to that as well. There's a channel 9 video. There are several, but I'll send you a link to one of them.
Okay, sounds great. We'll put it in the description as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
I would like to request our viewers and kind of like a call to action. So I would like to so we would like to make this a very robust rollout. So currently the MS test NuGet packages that I showed you, these are all in preview. So this is a preview kind of a release. We would like to make this a very robust rollout, which means we're really looking for lots and lots of feedback, and we're monitoring multiple channels for that feedback. So we want to know if something is broken. We want to know now so that we can fix it. So if there are people out there who are writing MS test based extensions, hey, we would like you to give MS test the MS test that we just released. We'd like you to give that a try. If you're writing new tests, we'd like you to give MS test the packages that we just published. We'd like you to give that a try. If you're if you're already a huge corpus of tests, if you're looking to add new tests or move them to MS to the latest versions, give this a try. So basically we are looking for as much feedback as we can get, and as soon as we can get as much feedback and as soon as we can get. So there are lots of new nice things in this release that we have done. Like I said, it provides uniform support across various app platforms: .NET Core, ASP.NET, Desktop, UWP, and so on. So it provides uniform support. There was a huge ask on user voice sometime back for something called data row. So it's basically the capability to provide inline data for your test case. So as part of your test case itself, you attribute and provide inline data. So that has been added. So there's this new functionality that has been added. There is also new capabilities added to you can add your test category attributes at class level, at assembly level, and so on. So there are lots of new features that have been added. Plus it provides very, very uniform app plat support. So my ask would be from our viewers, hey, give it a try and give us your feedback. That's something that we are really looking forward to.
Excellent. So the feedback would go where? Is there a GitHub? Where are you?
So right now it's not GitHub. So you can use the reporter feedback feature in VS.
Okay.
That will come to us. You can use Connect, of course. You can use Connect and send us feedback. You can give us feedback through user voice. I think that is also something that we've been monitoring very closely. And that's how we picked up the data row support. So there are multiple channels, and there is also a blog post that we put out a couple of weeks back. We are monitoring that for feedback as well. So there are these multiple channels of feedback. Whichever is convenient is fine.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot for the demo and all that information. Unless you have anything else to add or some concluding thoughts.
So yeah, so we really care about two things. Like I was saying earlier, we really care about two things: the existing constituency of users who are doing MS test-based test case development. We want to make absolutely certain that there is a path forward for them. And so that is one. And the second is we are also very, very interested in doing our bit to help the .NET Core platform and ASP.NET Core succeed. So we want to make sure that developers who come there have the choice that they need. So we are very happy about this release, and we are eagerly looking forward to feedback.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's all we have for today. Next week, we'll have another show with another guest. So bye, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Bye-bye.